longtemps que j'ai eu la chance de vous voir.
Ça fait un bout de
Ben
temps.
oui, merci.
Hello, welcome.
Well, we'll let you ask maybe because we did already our part of it. So
I have a question for both of you. Can I
Sure.
just go? Okay, so I was going to ask you about the balloon and something
Sure.
about Buy American. On the balloon, I'd like to know, do we know whether the balloon that traveled through Canada picked up anything of value, any intelligence of value? Also, were its signals jammed, either through Canadian equipment or American equipment? And I was going to ask on Buy American, State of the Union address, the President mentioned it. I've been looking through the regulation that they've drafted. It's very hard to figure out what it means for Canada. Do you have any assessment of whether it's actually serious in terms of dollar figures for potential Canadian industry, or is this kind of not really a big deal for Canada specifically? What was announced the other night?
So on the balloons, we work very closely with NORAD to ensure that we were analyzing and watching the trajectory of the balloon, and we continue to work with NORAD in that respect. The analysis of the balloon and contents, etc., that was referenced in your question is what the United States is undertaking on its own. We're not part of that.
So we don't know whether it picked up anything valuable in Canada?
That's the analysis that they're doing in terms of retrieval of the balloon.
And do we know whether there was any attempt made to jam its signals on the way through Canada or not?
We are still working with NORAD to ensure that we have full information.
Why didn't Canada shoot the balloon down when it was over our territory?
We were, as I mentioned, examining the trajectory and analyzing the balloon, including the height of the balloon and the contents of the balloon, and determined that it posed no imminent risk to Canadians at all. And of course, we were watching it very carefully to ensure that we were doing what is necessary to protect Canadians, and we were doing that in the context of the NORAD relationship, of course, so that when the United States made that decision to shoot it down, Secretary Austin did thank Canada because we were making these decisions jointly about imminent threats.
So were we not worried that the balloon was going to pick up intel from us when it was over our territory?
What we were making sure is that there was no threat to Canadians, and the analysis about any further intelligence gathering is ongoing right now.
Can you describe, how did you find out about it? Where were you, or the Prime Minister? Because I don't think people know how that worked.
It's a very interesting question because I was on my way to urgent meetings in Ottawa when I was pulled into a room for more urgent meetings relating to the balloons and that happened throughout last week, all Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday, making sure that we were watching this very closely, not only from a defense perspective, but also from an air safety transport perspective also.
And this is when it was in Canada, right? Not when it was already in the United States?
Well, of course, we were working with NORAD, so we were watching the trajectory of the balloon at all times through both countries.
So when the balloon was first picked up, was it when it was over Alaska, when it was over Yukon, when it was over BC, or when it was over Idaho? When was that?
As soon as it reached territory, we were tracking it very, very closely. And so, as you know, the trajectory of the balloon involved both countries, and that's why NORAD is so important. That's why we're modernizing NORAD. That's why we're putting almost $40 billion into continental defense, because this incident highlighted, again, the importance of having the aerospace surveillance that is necessary to detect all threats.
But that's the reason why we came. I think it's a first, we were told, where you have a Minister of Industry and a Minister of Defense coming to Washington. And I think it's a very powerful message at a time where we've seen so much in geopolitics and the fact that, the very successful corridor we have done in the automotive sector, that we're looking in semiconductors, that we can have in the aerospace and defense side. And that's why, we were to see of Boeing yesterday, Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics. So I think this is just a sign of time that when we come down to Washington, we mean business. And I think with Minister Anand, we achieved that. To your question, obviously, I watched the State of the Union address with much interest, noted the comments in the speech. And I would say a number of these measures were already somehow announced before. But what I think the takeaway of that for me, and that's why I said this morning, is what's the big prize between the United States and Canada is how can we innovate more together, how we can manufacture more together, and how we can sell more together to the rest of the world. And at a time where you see global supply chain being more regional, this concept of continental onshoring, for me, is what really matters. Because at the end of the day, I think that Canada can play a key role in the resiliency of U.S. supply chain. And I think that's what I hear when I hear talks about the Buy America. Is all about resiliency. That's the underpinning principle of the IRA and the CHIPS Act. And my comment when I'm in Washington is to say we can play a key role in that, because a decision on one side of the border will have an impact on both. So I think that more and more people realize that what we have done in the auto sector, we're trying to do in the semiconductor, we're going to try to do in aerospace and defense, because that's the best way to create job, prosperity, and I would say innovation on both sides of the border, because there's a uniqueness to the relationship between Canada and the United States that you can find anywhere in the world, is the integrated nature of supply chain. We understand that, but it's good when you talk to CEO to reiterate that and to make sure that our colleagues in Washington, we met with a number of people from Congress and the Senate, that we all appreciate that the best way for us to create jobs is to work together.
If you permit me, just one
Sure.
follow up on Buy American. So what they announced the other day was, I think, primary materials for construction, but within the bounds of international trade obligations. I'm just trying to figure out, dollar figure-wise, do you have any sense of whether this is actually important?
Well, I think, we have been successful over time. As you know, we've been trading with the United States for more than 100 years. So we have been always successful to make sure that the uniqueness of our relationship and our supply chain is well considered. And to your point about regulation, I think that is well understood in Washington. And what we have been successful in doing in the past, I'm sure we'll be successful in the future, because when you talk to CEOs, there's this interdependency that we talked about, that you make sure, whether it's critical minerals, for example, that are needed for the cars that are going to be rolling, or, as Minister Anand said, there'll be a piece of Canada in every F-35 jets in the world, not just the Canadian one.
3,100.
Yeah, so it's amazing.
F-35 jets. And I guess I will say that from a defense perspective, as we saw yesterday in our many meetings with defense suppliers, is that the interdependence of the supply chain is fundamental to the ultimate product that is being built. And we see this in the F-35, and we see this across the sector. And so it is well recognized, even at the congressional level, that this interdependence is crucial to businesses that are based in the U.S., and we've been very grateful that Canada has been treated sui generis.
Are you worried, Mr. Champagne, about the Buy American promise from Joe Biden, or is this nothing to worry about?
Well, I'm not worried in the sense that I understand, and I think it's well understood when you talk to businesses, that there's a uniqueness to the relationship between Canada and the United States that needs to be taken into account when you're talking in that context, that the best way to ensure that you are resilient, because at the end of the day, when you listen to that, it's all about resiliency. And the fact, for example, that critical minerals, that Canada, as what the economy of the 21st century needs, happens to be in Canada, to me is that this is a sign that we need to do more together. And I think this is true when it comes to the EV vehicle. This is true when it comes to semiconductor. You know what I said about the Albany-Bromont corridor? It's one thing to manufacture them in the United States, but at the same time, since most of the packaging and testing is done in Canada, you need to increase that capacity if you want to be resilient, which is the principle under that, is that we say we are more resilient in our economy. So for me, I would say that we are very cognizant of that. We're working with our allies and partners in down south. But I think talk to CEOs and they'll tell you, the only way that this can work is that if we work together.
Right, but do you think, knowing that do you fear that, in the future Canadian companies are going to get squeezed out of these U.S. procurement contracts because the president is promising, 100% on these federal infrastructure projects being Buy American, or do you think the WTO rules will get us past that?
Well, it's something that we've heard before in a sense, and at the end of the day, what I'm saying is that we've always been successful to fight for Canadian industry, to fight for Canadian jobs, and to make the case down south here in Washington that the best way to achieve what the president has said is objective is to work together. And I think this is well understood. Minister Anand, like I said, and I were with congressmen and women, senators, and this is well understood that what people understand is the uniqueness. You cannot just treat Canada like any other partners around the world. There's a uniqueness to our relationship and our supply chain that you need to take into account if you want to achieve the stated objective that the president has said.
Minister, is the DART going to deploy to Turkey?
Well, interesting. I spoke with the defense minister of Turkey, my good friend, yesterday. I assured him that we have an assessment team on the ground now that is examining ways in which Canada can be most helpful to Haiti. We'll have that assessment back within days, and then we'll make a decision about what type of aid would be most useful for Haiti. For Turkey.
For Turkey.
Yes, tout le monde. We're going to the Cyber Security Center. So thanks for being here. Appreciate it. Merci tout le monde.